Hello, welcome to our second episode of the as yet untitled comics podcast. We are here with the same people as last time, Connor and Andrew. Let's see how we go. What we doing this week, guys?
I think we're doing favorite books or something, favorite graphic novels.
Yeah, I mean, we could leave it open if it's a comic series or if it's a graphic novel,
Yeah.
but just anything in the comic medium.
Mm.
Just, favorite of all time. Had to narrow it down to one, although I'm sure we all had, other things that sprung to mind.
Yep. One sec. So, guys, just having a few audio tricks.
No worries.
Technical issues are the best.
I realised my laptop had somehow decided to default to the internal mics, and that's why I was getting
The wrong level.
some weirdness. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah,
me
hearing
fine.
you fine.
Okay. Then, yep, who wants to go first? Or do we want to discuss anything before we go into favourite books?
I'm happy to jump straight into it.
We jump straight in and whatever spins out, because I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
tangent somewhere.
Of course. Only natural.
Yeah. I don't know, Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Um,
I was thinking about this all week, really, what book I'd bring to talk about. And I had a really, really hard time picking because I think I've gone through so many phases as like a comic reader of things that have interested me or I've liked about certain things. And like I think for the first pretty much 10 years of reading comics that I did, I would only read superhero comics and nothing else. And then after that, I jumped into like 2000 AD and kind of 70s, 80s, 90s British comics, and then went through all of that. And then after that, started getting into indie stuff, and for a very long time. And I think probably the book I imagine both of you thought I was going to bring was going to be Hellboy, because Mike Mignola's work, Hellboy, has just always been a massive influence on me as like an artist and just as a reader. I just think he creates such a brilliant world and set of characters. And of those stories, I guess The Corpse would be my top Hellboy story. But I think part of the brief of this was what's your favorite book, which means it's the one that you keep returning to again and again and again. And I haven't read Hellboy now in about 2 years because I had that phase, and I'm now further on as a comic reader. So the only book that really popped to my mind is something that I've kind of consistently returned to throughout like the last few years, is a book of short stories, comic short stories, called Killing and Dying by Adrian Tamina, who, in case you don't know, I imagine both of you do know, but in case any of our listeners don't know, Adrian Tamina is a Japanese-American cartoonist who had a long-running series called Optic Nerve, which was basically serialized a lot of short stories in that comic, and Killing and Dying is a compilation of some of the later stories in that series. And his stories kind of, I think he's kind of compared quite a lot to like Daniel Clowes, who did Ghost World and stuff like that. But unlike Clowes, there doesn't seem to be much of a satirical element, and that I think Clowes, you read it, there's sort of this nasty edge to it, this kind of mean-spirited chaos, which is like feeds the petty parts of you as a reader of like, yes, I also think like this, I'm a horrible person. But Killing and Dying is kind of the opposite of that, and is incredibly sincere as like a series of short stories. And it's also, I think it's the only book he's done which is completely in color as well. All of his other graphic novels are in black and white. And some of these stories are in black and white, or with like monochrome kind of tinting throughout. But yeah, it's basically 6 stories, some humorous, some not, about different people and their day-to-day lives. And my favorite of the stories, and it's the one that I keep returning to again and again from this volume, and I feel it's just a masterpiece of like comic storytelling. Is a short story called Amber Sweet, which is about a woman who she's at university. There's some of the artwork there. That's the lead character there. And she's at university and she starts thinking that she's going mad because she hears all these people like talking about her behind her back and pointing at her, and it's kind of unusual and she doesn't know why. And it really starts messing with her head. And eventually one day she's walking down the road, and these guys pull up in their car and shout, "Hey, Amber Sweet," at her. So she goes home and types in Amber Sweet on the internet and discovers that there's a porn star called Amber Sweet who looks exactly like her. And so she realizes that all of these people who are constantly talking about her think that she's this porn star.
Where am I getting deja vu from this from?
I don't know. I've not come across this scenario elsewhere, unless
'Cause
maybe you've read the book.
No, I've definitely not read this, and it's something I feel like
Yeah,
I've seen on screen,
Yeah,
I kind of feel you on that.
like a TV show or a movie, maybe, where
Yeah.
this exact premise of being confused with a porn star, like,
yeah,
I've seen that somewhere.
yeah. This is an interesting way of doing it because like it kind of follows her life story for about 5 years after this revelation, and kind of how her looking like this woman impacts all of her relationships going forward with like men. And so she's constantly worried that like the men that she's dating are only dating her because they think because she looks like Amber Sweet. And like there's one scene where she's in this very loving relationship with this guy for 2 years, and only like later on discovers he's got a hard drive full of Amber Sweet porn on his computer, and she's like gutted, thinking, this is the man I thought I was going to marry, and he's got these degrading images of this woman basically, and how does he see me in light of that? And I don't want to say what happens at the end of the story, but like the last 2 or 3 pages of the story, some really interesting things happen in terms of how she kind of moves past having this anxiety over how she's like perceived by everybody. But I think what makes this collection so good is each of these stories take like a really kind of interesting conceptual idea about something that all of us will have experienced at some point in our lives, and kind of just plays with it and explores where it goes. So like one of the stories, Go Owls, is about a couple meeting at a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and they start a relationship, and you see how their kind of different addictions and abusive elements of their personality affect each other, and things like this. And I think what keeps me returning to this book is that each story is told in such an interesting way, not just in terms of narrative, but also like the layout of the page. So like there's there's a story, the title story of the collection, I think. Is it the title story of the collection? Or it might not be. It's called Translated from the Japanese. It's about a woman and her children flying from Tokyo to California. And it's basically about the flight and how she's going through this divorce, and it's kind of her interior monologue as she's thinking about her relationship with her husband. And throughout the whole story, you never see her face or her children, and instead each panel is just glimpses of kind of things around her or her environment, and it kind of really puts you in like the space of where her head is at,
Almost
rather than asking you to like
almost a point of view
look at
trick.
this character and get to know her. Yeah, exactly. And it's also like the ending of it is one of the kind of most uplifting endings of anything I've ever read. That short story, it's really kicks you in the gut with the sweetness.
It's a very positive book you've chosen, then.
I mean, yeah, in some ways, like there's, it's kind of got this quiet melancholy to it, but there's also this feeling that, things are okay eventually. Like, we all have our challenges that we have to like negotiate throughout life, and life is never going to be perfect, I guess, because things can come out of nowhere and drastically affect how you experience life or your kind of contentment for many years. but like I guess in the end everything's going to be okay, you know. Which is not to say all the stories have happy endings, because a few of them don't. But like, I don't know. I think Adrian Tamina. I think the reason why he's such a brilliant writer is he kind of approaches all of his characters with a lot of empathy, you know, and you kind of are really asked to put yourself in the shoes of that person and kind of, would you make the same choices in this situation? You know, what are the defects of your personality that are going to hold you back in life, or how would you be stopped from acting in this way? You know,
I've not read anything by him myself. Would you say this is a good kind of starting volume?
I mean, I think he's just released a new book, which I've also got here somewhere, called "The Loneliness of Long Distance Cartoonist," which is a memoir of his time in the 90s.
Yeah, my shop,
it's a really good read.
That.
Yeah, it's probably the only read of his I'd say would benefit a little bit from you having read some of his other stuff before.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of references to his career which are only going to make sense if you have a passing familiarity with it. But saying that, you could read Wikipedia and just read a 5-minute shakedown on who this guy is, and you get the references.
That book looks like a Moleskine journal.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it's cool because it's got the rubber band on the side,
nice.
so you take that off, and you have like the bit like you always do with your Moleskine. You know, if found, please return. And then all of the pages are drawn on like a gridded paper, printed to look like they're on a gridded paper.
That's very clever.
Nice.
So he's always got like a nice, and then like his kind of author information at the back is like a handwritten note.
That is committing to your theme. I approve of that.
Yeah, he's a really interesting designer, and he's done a lot of work for like the New Yorker, doing covers and spot illustrations and things like that. So there's always a nice sense of like an aesthetic to all of his comics that he makes. To be honest, I'd say like in terms of getting into Tamina, that you could pick up any book that he's done. They're all completely standalone. I'd say the earlier stuff in the 90s is probably a lot bleaker and more melancholic than his later stuff, but also, you know, quite interesting. My favorite book is still Killing and Dying, and I don't think he's topped it. And to be honest, I don't know if he ever will, because it's just that brilliant. It's the graphic novel that every cartoonist wishes they could make. But saying that, the rest of his books are also all 10 out of 10s as far as I see him.
It's high praise.
Sorry, I just realised I like ranted at you guys for like a good 15.
No,
that's the point of this episode.
Yeah, it's passion in your book, in your choice, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, highly recommended. And if you're in that same wheelhouse of like in kind of Ghost World and Chris Ware and kind of, you know, experimental indie cartoonists like this, you probably will have already read Tamina, but he's exactly in that same sort of circle of artists, and there's a lot to like in his work, because I don't think his work has that mean streak that a lot of the other cartoonists do, you know. There's something a bit more sympathetic about it, and you know, I think he also tells slightly different stories, partly because of his heritage, and a lot of his comics kind of navigate like these issues, important contemporary issues of like race and class and things like this, which someone like Daniel Clowes, as much as I love his comics, I think doesn't ever attempt to ask that question in an educated light. You know, Daniel Clowes will do something like show a racially kind of exploitative picture and comment on racism like that, whereas Adrian Tamina will speak from his own experience, which is probably a lot more authentic.
Well, that's good. Interesting choice. Definitely. Yeah, not someone I was like super familiar with. Yeah, I'd heard of a couple of these books that you mentioned, but I've never looked into them or read any of them. But you know, now I might do.
it's mine. It's what's the phrase I'm trying to think of? You're going to fall down the rabbit hole. That's what I'm trying to say. Once you read one to me in a book, you'll want to read all the rest.
I'm trying to make a bit more of an effort to read outside of the direct market at the moment.
Yeah, me too. I've been doing that over the last couple of months, just kind of chipping away at things. Like I say, making an effort.
Yeah, well, you buy from OK Comics, don't you? They do a really good job of pushing that.
They're a great store for that, and they stock all sorts of obviously they stock all the big superhero stuff as well, because I mean they're a store, they need to survive, they need to make the money. But they do a great job of really promoting the other stuff as well, not just having a copy on the shelf at the back. They do make an effort of trying to actually recommend stuff.
Well, now that you say it, I think the way that I found Killing and Dying was I was in London for a bit, visiting somebody or whatever, and had free time and went to Gosh Comics in Soho. And I don't know if either of you have ever been, but they're basically, it's kind of a bit boutiquey. It's not quite how you'd expect a comic shop to look like. And the kind of ground floor, the main, where, the kind of main spaces is basically no superhero comics. It's all international comics or comics by kind of organized by creators. So you'll see like an Alan Moore shelf, a Neil Gaiman shelf.
This is the advantage of that store there, and and my store in where I'm with OK Comics is there are other mainstream comic stores in the immediate vicinity that you can get all your superhero stuff for. Very easily. And don't get me wrong, those other stores do stock other stuff as well. It's not like they're exclusively that. But by being more, OK Comics and was it Gosh that you were talking about there?
Yeah, Gosh.
By focusing on other stuff, it gives them just a bit more of an identity to set them apart. So even just from a market perspective, it's probably a good choice for them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like Gosh. Every time I'm in London, I try and head down to Gosh because, just the stuff that they cycle onto they have these massive tables on the ground floor where they'll put all their kind of new books that they've got in, and I just find stuff there that I never would have found otherwise, or might not have looked at otherwise. So they're really good at pushing stuff that you won't have found.
The thing I love about Gosh is it does sell superhero stuff.
Yeah.
I love that upstairs is this beautifully presented bookshop, basically, full of all the kind of stuff we've been talking about here. I mean, you go downstairs and it's a basement full of superhero comics.
All the long boxes and everything.
Yeah, in the way you expect superhero comics to be presented.
Get in the basement with you.
That's honestly not too dissimilar to my my local Forbidden Planet.
Yeah.
Upstairs, it's all it's not like the bookshop stuff, but it's the
the toys,
the toys, the figures, the statues, and some graphic novels and a little bit of stuff here and there. They did recently actually move the new weekly comics upstairs, so you actually find them easier. But then it is downstairs in the basement that are all the superhero comics and the manga and everything else. So I mean,
with the Forbidden Planet we have there,
I guess it's just playing into the aesthetic of the market. Where, like I said, that is kind of what if you think of a comic book shop, that is kind of what you expect, and maybe that's something that's good for them.
Forbidden Planet in Hanley, which is a Forbidden Planet International, they are downstairs on the ground floor. It is just Funko Pops. That is what I mean. You go upstairs and it's comics, board games, RPGs, and action figures for comics and Marvel and DC action figures. But yeah, it's one floor that's basically just Funko products these days.
I find the Funko Pop vinyl figures really, I don't know, I have complicated feelings about them. A few people bought them for me thinking like, you like comics, you'll like this. I'm like, great, what do I do with it now?
I own far too many.
I'm just gonna keep it in this box on the shelf.
I have some of them, as you can see on that shelf over there.
Yeah.
But they're mixed in with other
But I
things.
think the moment that I decided, oh, sorry, what are you saying?
No, just mine are mixed in with other things. I couldn't have just those like some people do.
Yeah, but I think the
James.
moment that I decided I had a not a especially positive relationship with them was I did a Comic-Con in York, and I was one of 6 guests who made comics, and none of us were particularly like names that you'd recognize. We're all people who were doing it ourselves, and I thought this is cool, but like the whole shop, the whole floor of the convention was all pop vinyl kind of stuff like that, and then shoved right in the back was 7 tables with no foot traffic past it, which is where we were. And this just says a lot about what's happened to the kind of comics culture in this country. Sorry, I'm turning into an old grumpy man now, but like the thing that built this is the thing that's being neglected, I guess.
I want to sell my collection of them. I have enough, but I was collecting at the same time with some friends, and I loved. I don't regret getting them because I love the rush of a collection.
Hunt.
I love collecting them. Now I own them. I just like, what the fuck do I do with them? Just I sold a few, and I need to put the effort into. It's just a lot of work.
I've got probably a more or less ideal amount where I've got just enough that I can display them on like my shelves like that there, and they look fine, but not too many where I'm like, what do I do with these?
Yeah.
So it's just I don't want any more.
I've ever got, I'm actually happy I have this, as I've got a Hellboy one downstairs, and he guards my Blu-ray collection. So like I'm happy with that. That's the ideal amount of pop vinyls for me.
So
the reason they took off is they're just so accessible and cheap compared to other collectibles.
Yeah, that is exactly it. When a Batman statue or Wonder Woman statue is 80, 90, 100, 300 pound, a £10 pop figure.
Yeah, it's appealing.
But speaking about obsessions, shall we move on to my choice?
Yes, please. I'm excited.
So I picked Kieran Gillen and Jimmy McKelvey's Phonogram. In later volumes, you've also got Wilson and Klaus, but I'm talking about Volume 1, Rue Britannia.
Oh, you're narrowing it down to that specifically?
Oh, yes, because I've reread Rue Britannia today in prep.
Good choice.
2007, it came out. It's an indie comic, but it is a direct market indie comic, which I think is a different beast to what you've been discussing so far. I mean, if direct market comics are already a niche product, this doubles down on making something as niche as possible.
It amazes me that after this came out and did well enough, not amazingly.
Don't think it did well enough for them to continue.
Not really. I mean, well enough that it was only really technically a mini, wasn't it?
It's six issues, yeah. I know they have complicated feelings over it and how it did.
Well enough that at least critically, it kind of gave them some recognition to do other projects and then come back and do more later.
It's fascinating looking at early Gillen and early McKelvey. McKelvey is the seeds are there, but what McKelvey goes on to become is so removed from.
Yeah, out of interest, when you reread it today, did you read that version in the hardcover with the the coloring? Because
I read the very first issue on digitally, black and white, but then I switched to the hardcover. And
so was it published in black and white to begin with, and then coloured?
Yes,
Volume 1 was,
Right.
When they collected it all for this edition, they decided to colour it.
Right.
Because I think 2 and 3 were always published in colour. I think Matt Wilson on the colours.
Yeah, 2 and 3 was. I'm not sure if 2 was Wilson. Probably,
given that their history together. But I mean, maybe not. But 1 was just
that is our early McKelvey art.
Wow.
Yeah, still trying, and I do wonder how much, because I've never read it in color because it was exclusive to that hardcover release, which
Yes.
annoyingly I never got my hands on, and now it's out of print, and it's very, very expensive that I can't really justify buying.
I've only read Wicked and the Divine by Gillen and McKelvey, and I found it really difficult to get into, and I didn't continue reading. I think I read the first hardcover, and
Wicked and Divine is probably way more open than Phonogram. Phonogram is obtuse by design.
I think it depends on your tastes, though. In some ways,
a splash, and one of my favorite splashes in comics.
Wow.
From the second series, where McKelvey is starting to become much more signaturely McKelvey.
Yeah, he does. He has some great layout works. I think the thing with just what we're talking about them in general, Wicked and Divine is a lot more accessible. It's the concept of it is based around pop music, and that kind of permeates into the ethos of the accessibility of the book in general.
Well, I think Gillen always described it as if Phonogram was about the fans' relationship to art, Wicked and Divine is about creators making art.
Yeah. Which, again, I think depending on your tastes, you might enjoy Phonogram. Not that you might enjoy it more, but you might actually find it a better entry point to their
from what
works.
you're saying, I'm getting that feeling, to be honest. I found
for core concept,
with Wicked in the Design, I found like the issue for me was kind of Gillen's narrative style. I found it very difficult to kind of. It was, you know what it was like? It was like reading. It reminded me of reading Final Crisis, kind of with the Morrison-esque kind of
without all the lead up.
Yeah, and I found it difficult to kind of wrap my head around what was going on exactly.
Something I realised while rereading this volume is, even as a writer, Kieran Gillen he's a critic at heart.
Yes,
everything he writes is his recent work.
his background is as a games journalist.
Yes,
and I think even to this day, it shows in all of his work. He hasn't been a games journalist for 15 years, maybe longer at this point, and at least not regularly anyway. But it still shows in the way he writes.
Yeah, I mean, Die is a critical look at the nature of tabletop games.
It is, and we're also throwing in critical analysis of some classical literary authors such as Tolkien and
but
Jane Austen.
How he's picking authors that feed into the early days of the creation of
gaming.
Yeah. And reading, I felt there is a lot in this volume that I feel he's re-exploring in Once and Future.
Oh, that's interesting, because it's been a couple of years since I've read Phonogram.
Because obviously the first volume is very heavily laden in the notion of Britannia. So the core concept of Phonogram is, if we take the phrase "music is magic" literally, and if there are some people who truly build their identities into the music they love and can perform magic as part of that, like those people who always manage to get into the club, that's a form of weaving a spell.
It's like super fans becoming warlocks.
Yeah,
I like that. That's a really cool way of looking at it.
And the first volume is a critical look at Britpop.
Right.
The main character is a character who grew up through the movement of Britpop, and how, even though I guess he starts having considered himself moved on, but slowly realizes he hasn't. He's also an absolute prick. It's worth.
He is. That's kind of the point, though.
Yeah, first volume, Dave Carl is not a likable. Maybe likable isn't the right word. He shouldn't be a likable.
He's likable
character.
in the same way that characters in Always Sunny are likable, in that they're all terrible
yes.
people, but you enjoy watching them. But you
Yeah,
wouldn't want to actually be friends with them.
Thing is, he mellows and evolves over the 3 series, and in the second 2 series, he plays much of a background part. It's only this first volume that follows him.
Yeah, it's really his
and
story.
It's partly about him having to grow up a little bit, isn't it? Like,
so what would your abilities be according to your music taste then in phonogram?
I'm not sure I would be a phonomancer.
Yeah.
I'm not. There's moments in time where there are certain parts of music I loved, and I still very much enjoy music, but I don't know if I currently live and breathe music enough to be a phonomancer.
I think what's interesting is, I do love music a lot. I have a music degree. It's literally what I studied. But I think the thing with phonomancer, it's quite specialized.
Yeah.
It's not just a love of music. It's like I say, this one's Britpop. It's quite specific that you gotta hone in. Like I say, it's the super fans of not just the art form, but of elements in particular.
Yeah. I mean, this book is formative to me in the fact that it shaped, when I first read it, it made me reevaluate and reshape my music taste. It opened me up to a lot more. Like, growing up, I was a pre-scene kid, because the scene kids weren't quite like, before scene kids and emo hit it. I was that wave just
kind of
before.
the end of the new metal period.
Yeah, where it was a lot of pop punk, a lot of Green Day, a lot of and I'd slightly aged out of that as emo hit and looked upon that scene with a little bit of derision.
Yeah.
Like, I remember mocking as a kid My Chemical Romance fans. As an adult, I freaking love My Chemical Romance.
I mean, I am a little bit younger than you, a couple of years. And I was around in high school right as the emo stuff was kind of peak.
Yeah.
And even then I looked at the MCR fans with derision. I stand by that to this day.
I was close enough that it was the year below me that repeat kind of emo. I'm not like, it was that close of a
yeah, there's not that much age between us.
But like, me, as in 31-year-old me, absolutely loves My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, same.
I probably loved My Chemical Romance then as well. I just refused to admit it.
You see, like, I moved around loads as a kid, like every 2.5, 3 years, moving to a different country because of my dad's job. So I never I never got the kind of scene, like, if there was like a particular emo scene or whatever that was going on at the time, it was like a very, I don't know, going to school was like going to the zoo. There was all these people dressed up in these different ways, and I had no idea why. I was like, why are you doing that? And then on top of that, like, my dad was a psycho rockabilly punk in the 80s, and my mum was a goth who looked like she'd been pulled out of the Sisters of Mercy or something. So, like, when your parents look like that in their young years, and their music continues to be characterized,
they probably understood emo better than you did.
Yeah, like, I always looked like the most normal kid in school, because what's the point of rebelling through that sort of fashion or whatever when your parents already did it much better than you ever would?
Emo and scene, especially emo though, has been glorified in recent years to be a lot more of a look than it really, because in reality most emo kids were really quite lazy and just threw on a black hoodie and that was about it, and just kept the hood up at all times.
A bit of eyeliner, hair dye.
But it wasn't like, if we're saying emo and scene and those conjure things to mind, like scene especially, I think, with the bright hair and to the side, but it wasn't really like that at the time.
Either side, I think there's slight differences to either side of the kind of Atlantic as well, in the right that America had Hot Topic.
Yes.
While
we technically had, I think it was a Blue Banana that was our equivalent, but
I can't.
I
I
think
like.
that was it.
Where the fuck I was at that time, I had no
I
idea.
remember
what
there was. You might actually. Are either of you familiar with Stoke/Hanley?
No.
I've been there a couple of times.
So for do you know where the Forbidden Planet is?
Yeah.
Next door to it was a shop called Ralphers, still open, and they sold like bead bracelets and things, and they were a big part of the.
I think it's fascinating. Like the way people look and think of emo and scene now, which is, I don't know, what, 10 to 15 years removed
Yeah.
at most, is it's through the same lens that Stranger Things looks at the 80s, which it's not really how it actually was. It's this cultural imagination of the 80s, though.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same things happened with things that were there while we were in school.
I remember owning copious amounts of wallet chains.
Yeah, they were a big, yeah.
Oh, I had
Jeans that were
chain
far too baggy
Nightmare
for
Before Christmas.
anyone.
I will defend baggy jeans over the ultra skinny jeans that came right after.
Skinny jeans, I really don't, and I can't respect anybody who wears them.
The bold statement.
I mean, skinny jeans, I don't think ever went. They're still the go-to jean style of choice.
They are, but they're not as skinny as they were in the
Yeah.
immediate aftermath of the baggy jeans era.
Like, I wonder how much of emo flowed into that small little folk revival as well we got for a few years.
Probably a reasonable amount. Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, I guess like the closest I've ever been to like looking at a scene or being around it, I guess, was when I was at uni in York, and all these people dressing up like druids and elves and like
that's the most
witches
York thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, and I looked at them and I'm like, I mean, you all look fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing, but like,
I think every uni has like that thing. Where I was in my first year, there was a guy who lived on the floor above me. Couldn't even tell you his name. Don't know his name because he was the guy in the suit. And this was he wore a 3-piece suit every day, no matter what. Like the rest was it'd be a 9 a.m. lecture, and we were in the building attached to the university at this point, first year, and people would turn up to this lecture in like their pajamas, whatever. And this guy was there in a 3-piece suit without fail. Like he would stroll around doing his laundry, like on the 5th floor or whatever it was, the laundry room. He would go down in a 3-piece suit. It's like, so he was the suit guy
in college. Like before he got to uni, he was probably the trench coat guy.
Yeah,
probably.
Because everyone who was in whatever their kind of like, at least roughly our generation's alternative scene, had the friend in the trench coat, right? Like.
And we all thought about being the guy in the trench coat.
But thankfully, someone else took that.
Yeah. No, and
regardless of weather as well, like those trench coats were not good in the summer.
No, they were not. But they committed to the bit.
Yeah.
But this is part of why I love Phonogram, and to a different extent, Wicked and Divine is its relation to music and popular culture.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're not even necessarily discussing what Phonogram is discussing here, but it's taking us on a tangent.
It is a springboard of ideas, isn't it? That book.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's it reminded me a lot of early Vertigo as well. There's a lot of Hellblazer in it.
I really need to read more Hellblazer and more 90s Vertigo. I think I've read a couple volumes of Sandman and then all of Preacher, and that's about it, to be honest.
And not in a way that the book is anything like Hellblazer. But Cole has read a few Hellblazer comics and has put a little bit of it into his
British swagger.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I do love that book. Does that collection there include the backups that came in?
It does, yes.
Oh,
which is the backup that you
Curse Song?
Yeah,
that one. I think it's from the first issue of the 3rd volume.
Yeah,
it's like 4 or 5 pages.
It's Logos listening to Taylor Swift over and over.
Yeah. It's just like 5 pages, and the concept of a Curse Song is it's
real.
It is real. It's less magical. Obviously, there's an extra magical element in Phonogram.
But it's magical realism. isn't it?
It
We all
is. It-
have.
A song that conjures memories of a certain thing that is particularly painful, and
But you listen to it, and then you listen to it again, and
To torture
yeah, and it's like 5 pages. I shamefully can't remember who the artist is off the top of my head.
I mean,
but it's
let me find out for you.
it is phenomenal. Like it's possibly my favorite story in all of comics, and it's like 5 pages. Which I didn't pick it for this because it's not, it's like a 5-page backup in one issue, but it's spectacular.
What is your curse song that you can't listen to?
I can't say that.
Nope.
You can't.
No, you can't tell someone your curse song.
No.
Is it like if somebody knows that they're power of you in a phonogram or something?
No, it's just a very
It's
private.
it's a very personal thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, I'm something of an exhibitionist, so I'm very, very willing to put out my pain and trauma onto the internet.
Yeah. But all of it, and I think that's why just to bring this back around, why for some people I think phonogram is more accessible than Wiccan
Sarah
Divine.
Gordon.
Sarah Gordon, thank you. It's a wonderful piece. But the reason I think
I Wish You Would was his
that the song. I couldn't remember which song it was. But the idea that with phonogram it's the fans engaging with it, whereas with Wiccan Divine it is literal gods, and it is the creation. So I think for a lot of people this is more. It's easier to empathize with in some ways because they are. I think the majority of the audience are the fans rather than creators.
I think as pretentious as it is, which it is.
Yeah, it does not hesitate to, especially in that first volume, throw in as many Britpop names, songs, bands as it possibly can.
I mean, there's a whole dream sequence where he goes through he basically travels through the memory of Britpop.
Yeah, in the
Jarvis Cocker on the street, Damon Albarn is there, and
in the single issues they had a glossary at the back of every issue with like, okay, here's all the songs and the bands that we listed just in case you don't know them.
That's awesome. I love it when
chances are you wouldn't know all of them unless you were a big Britpop fan.
This came out 2007 as well, which was pre Image's second boom.
Yeah, because that was about 2012, 2013 was really around that point, I think.
Yeah, 2012 was when Saga hit, and I think that heralds Boom's.
That's probably the start of that second wave.
Image's second coming, yeah.
You know what I missed at the time, and I think Dark Horse were publishing it originally, but Image are publishing it now, and I really want to read it as Fear Agent.
Vic Remender.
Yeah, like that's been
I've read bits of it
for a really long time.
I'm not a Remender fan. And I've tried multiple times because he tends to work with some really great artists and I'm interested in. And then I try it and I'm like, no, I hate this. Every single time without fail.
I'm neither here nor there. I wouldn't go.
Read the whole title of his, to be honest.
He's fine. I'm never gonna. I don't think I'm gonna hunt out his works, but I also wouldn't not read them.
Is it him that did Black Science?
Black Science.
Brubaker Phillips books. Absolutely.
Yes, I need to get some of those. I've read some, but I haven't got the nice fancy hardcovers for a lot of them.
They're a team up there, right? Like Gillen and McKelvey as a duo. And I'm not sure if we'll get any more from them as a duo.
We've got a little Batman story coming.
Oh yes, we have.
I mean, it's going to be like a 6-page thing in the Batman Black and White anthologies that's going on right now. I think it's in issue 5 in March. Yeah, I think there's like 2 issues published right now so far. It's like a 6-issue mini.
DC's big kick at the moment is anthologies.
Yeah. And this was like just ahead of the wave of where they announced this before they were, that we realized they were going to be doing a lot of anthologies.
They just announced Gotham, didn't they, for May?
Yes,
which is going to be a future state set book.
That's the future state because they have a Gotham one for just present day anthology as well.
Batman Unwrapped, Unhinged,
I don't know the name of it off the top of my head.
Clothed.
Doesn't feature Batman at all, but let's put Batman's name on it for the.
I'm going to try and quickly Are you thinking of Urban Legends?
Yeah.
No, that's the Tom Taylor miniseries, which I'm
No, it's
also
not
very.
that. You're thinking of You're thinking of Dark Knights.
I am thinking of Dark Knights.
Yeah.
There's too many.
This alone is
yes. So
highlight.
Urban Batman Urban Legends is the Gotham book though. As much as you're saying, oh, it's got Batman in the name, it is the present day Gotham book because it has the Grifter story in Gotham. It has a Red Hood story, a Harley Quinn story, an Outsiders story.
And some crazy good creators in that book.
Starsky is on there. Matthew Rosenberg. Yeah. Things to be excited at coming out of DC.
Looking at Tinian's latest.
Tynan is how you say his name, by the way. Yeah.
Tiny Onion. Looking at Tiny Onion's.
Yes.
Tiny Onions.
That's his website name for anyone who doesn't get that. His brand.
Yeah. Tynan, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at his latest newsletter, like that second half, like we were saying the other day when we were talking how he's someone who has a very clear view of what he thinks the American comic industry should look like to survive, and is doing his damnedest to single-handedly make it that way if he can.
And what's exciting is because his career started. I mean, he was, I believe, a student. He was one of Snyder's students at university. Yeah, because Scott Snyder also, I don't know if he still does, but used to be, a writing professor.
Yeah, we had Bennett came out of that group as well.
Yeah, there was a few. But Tynan's probably the most prolific at this stage, at least in this circle.
Some of his earlier DC work was the Talon.
Yeah, so he actually started by doing backup stories in Snyder's Batman.
Yeah, I seem to remember seeing his name quite a bit during New 52.
It was because, like I say, he was Snyder's student, started doing backup stories on his Batman. They moved him on to Talon, and he was kind of off and on during the New 52. He was kind of there. I think he worked on the Batman Eternal, both those series that were the weekly books that went on for like a year each.
Yeah.
I think they had like a team of writers because they were weekly, obviously. But I think he was part of those teams. And it wasn't until like a Rebirth hit where they kind of gave him a more prominent role, where they gave him Detective Comics, and he basically did Detective Comics but X-Men as a team. And that was really great, actually, that run. And he's kind of steadily worked his way up the ranks of DC Comics to a point now where he's like in that next in line with Joshua Williamson, kind of spearheading the next run of events potentially. So it's really interesting because he obviously has a lot of ideas about what he thinks the comics industry should be, and I love that he's finally in a position where he can start putting that into practice.
Independent stuff, and his create your own stuff, and even in his Batman stuff, right?
Yeah, he has a whole ethos of not trying to look backwards, trying to do new stuff. Yeah. And
so he's like, right now, Batman is the oldest he's ever been, with a furthest along in this timeline than we've ever been. So let's embrace that. We won't. And he seems to have a firm belief, like, we don't need to basically keep doing year one. We don't need to keep resetting the clock.
Do new stuff instead.
New characters to get new people.
And he is very trying, because I think Punchline is the one I think people are familiar with right now.
Ghostmaker, Clown Killer,
Clown Hunter,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got
and credit to the artists he's working with. Jorge Jimenez is doing a lot of this heavy lifting. Actually, is doing the design work for most of these characters. But they're all pretty memorable designs. Just if you haven't seen them, obviously this means nothing. But those names. You just say, Punchline. I immediately know what Punchline looks like after just one appearance because it was a distinctive design.
Punchline's existence as well, I think, is that final. We were pretty much already there, but it's that final cut to allow Harley to fully transition away from the Joker. And
kind of, we can push Harley more into the good guy territory she's been heading towards for the last few years anyway. But like now we've got to. I don't want to boil Punchline down to just being a Harley Quinn replacement, But I think that's probably how a lot of DC editorials see it.
Yeah.
I do think she's more going on as a character than just that. But I think the editorial sees it as, okay, well, we've got our Harley Quinn figure being the villain, so fine, you can do what you want with Harley now, I guess.
And this new era of Gotham, they seem to have decided to double down on Harley as hero.
Or at least trying to be, yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily a villain away from the Joker, but actually actively trying to do good in the world.
In her own twisted way,
Harley-like
usually,
way,
yeah. But
she's still Harley.
yeah. But it is good stuff. Yeah, looking forward to seeing what DC do with that.
It's the best thing that could ever happen to that character was taking her away from the Joker.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anyone who's watched the Harley Quinn animated show, and frankly, you all should if you haven't. It is phenomenal. Season 2 is even better.
Yeah.
If any of you get to the end of that show and don't believe that Harley and Ivy is the right pairing that should become the standard pairing in comics, then I don't think you watched the show, because you clearly didn't.
That opinion for a long time.
I mean, I know it's been there.
Watching it in the UK?
Season 1 was on Channel 4. Season 2 hasn't been yet.
Right.
I did just have
the Channel 4 streaming app. It will be on there.
It's not at the moment. It was one of those timed.
Yeah.
It'll probably go back up when they air season 2, though.
Yeah, or they'll do reruns at some point.
You can also buy season 1 for like 15 quid on Amazon. And season 1 and 2 are out on Blu-ray in America soon. And Warner Blu-rays are usually region free.
Okay.
There you go.
For anyone who's potentially interested at home on that information.
It is well worth checking out.
Here is another episode of the podcast where Connor doesn't have to talk about DC. Where we've spent a good chunk of time discussing DC.
I literally do 2 different DC podcasts a week.
Yeah.
And yet here I am. I can't help myself, can I? I'm recording one of them immediately after this.
Right.
Yet here I am anyway.
It's your trial run.
Yeah. Fortunately, I did not pick a DC book as my best comic, though. Because it would have been easy to. Like I say, it's realistically probably what I've read more of than anything else in comics, just by the nature of I do 2 DC shows a week.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a reason I started that in the first place, and it wasn't just on a whim. So it would have been easy. And I mean, the book I did chose is from a creator who has done a lot of DC work and Vertigo work for that matter. And that is The Underwater Welder by Jeff Lemire, which I absolutely love. I mean, anyone who follows me on Twitter will recognize this image as my profile picture, because that is a little sketch I've got in my copy from Lemire. And that's been my picture for years at this point. So yeah, it's clearly a book I love. I think a lot of the descriptions of this book don't do it justice, because I think most people, when they describe this book, even the foreword, which I want to say is by Damon Lindelof, yeah, it is, talks about the Twilight Zone, elements of it, and calls it, the best Twilight Zone episode that never aired. And while that does technically cover, that is an accurate description of part of the book, like the back third, maybe, if that. It's not what the book is. So I think I want to move away from selling it like that, because this is a book about a man who has never dealt with the death of his father. Like his father died when, so his dad was 33 and drowned one night. And this was when he was like 10 years old. And this book is set when he is now 33 years old. So he is the age when his father died, and his wife is 8-9 months pregnant as this book starts. He is about to become a father for the first time. And it takes place on the week of the anniversary of his father's death. And so, you can see all these things, and this is, where it really starts to dive in. No pun intended, because that is his job. He is an underwater welder. He spends a lot of the book jumping. It goes off like an oil rig sort of station. I don't know what you call them, but if I say an oil rig, people know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And he goes down and fixes the pipes and stuff that are under there. And there's a point in the book where relatively early on where he goes down and he has a vision of like his father down there, and he sees something, and it's played very mysteriously. And this is where the Twilight Zone elements come in, where it's played like he's seeing something. Is it real? Is it not? They basically pull him up and it's like, we don't know what happened down there. We think your oxygen, there was was something wrong with that. So you were probably just seeing things. And while he's doing this, it's like 3 weeks before his wife's due, and he's just out on his last job basically before he takes leave. And they're just like, just go home, just be with your wife, just go and be there. And he's a very distant man. I get the you get the impression that he's not always like this. It is particularly just now, just around this time of year, especially, but this time, this year more than ever, because of all this stuff is on his mind. And the book becomes about him dealing with what happened. There's a lot of flashbacks to when he was 10, around the build up to that week, what actually happened with his father, the relationship. He was, his father was a drunk. It's a large part of the reason why his parents split up. And his father was a salvage diver, so he owned the local pawn shop, but he also dived down and see what he could get and then sell in the shop as well. And it was, the assumption was always it was one of these dives that they killed him because he was drunk. And I won't spoil what it is, but it is revealed later on as to specific elements of what actually went down. But the Twilight Zone elements there are a point, in the back third of the book where he's like, no, I've got to get back out there. That thing he saw when they were like, no, it's just your oxygen. He's like, I've got to get back to it. And he goes down. And when he seemingly passes out, and when he comes back, he's in the town. But there's no one there at first. It's like a ghost town. And it's, and then it's like, no, he's actually in the time period. He's in that week when his dad died, and he's wandering around like a ghost of Christmas past almost. So he's wandering around, seeing what happened and seeing the reality through adult eyes. And of course, the reality is he's not really doing this. It's all him exploring his memory that he's repressed over the years. But the way it's told is just so eerie and phenomenal. And Lemire, I think, is obviously, if you're familiar with his work as a Big Two writer, you probably know him as a writer more than anything. Of course, Sweet Tooth is probably the big exception to that rule, where people will know his art. And he has drawn some other stuff, of course. Trillium for Vertigo, I think. I think most recently Royal City for Image.
I've read some of Royal City. I liked it.
Royal City is. So obviously, this I've chosen is it's just a graphic novel that was published straight as that. Royal City was direct market, published monthly. That is, in my opinion, his best monthly work by quite a long shot. Once you read the whole thing, it's phenomenal. But I think it is his work as a cartoonist that sets him apart. I think it's so interesting seeing, because both of you, the art that the artists that you chose for your books were quite traditionally clean artists, I would say. Whereas Lemire is the opposite. It's very scratchy and raw.
I remember when I first saw his artwork and I couldn't stand it, and I was like, this isn't how comics are drawn. And then I kept reading his work, and he's now one of my favorite artists. Because,
I think,
he draws not how comics are drawn.
It's an acquired taste, but the way because this is all in black and white, this book, which most of the stuff he just draws is, not all of it, but most. And the way he plays with the blacks and the whites and the shadows, and like the watercolor inks smudges he uses for shadows is quite effective. Like this is here at night, and you can just see it's all black, and then the white is drawn on top of it. It's actually very reminiscent of like Batman the Animated Series, with the way they drew on the black paper. It's kind of very reminiscent of that, but there are a couple of key times where it just breaks format, and it's usually when he's underwater, and like you have 2-page spreads like this, where it's just this
nice,
gorgeous layout where you don't know exactly what's happening at first. You have to deconstruct it, and this is part of a whole sequence where this is again where he's transitioning into the Twilight Zone era of the book, where it's like that, where it's this gorgeous, haunting, beautiful, and it's the washed out inks become these greys that really blend the deep blacks and the whites together in a way that most cartoonists just don't do. It's very unusual. His style is actually very unique, I would say, and there is no book of his I wouldn't recommend. I think I've read almost all of it at this point. But this is the one that's my favorite. I think it is that relationship with his father, that fear of him becoming a father, is very relatable. A lot of his stuff is, frankly. It's
I've read Underwater World, The Nobody, which was the first thing I read of his probably, and Essex County in terms of his written and drawn stuff. And every time I read something new by him, my immediate instinct is to go and spend all my money on everything else he's ever written and drawn.
Yeah, I've done that. Lost Dogs is his earliest work, and it shows. Don't get me wrong. It's not as refined. It's more raw in the art, but the story, that emotional gut punch that he is so good at, he tends to pull out in every story he does, is there in that. As a storyteller, his instincts have been there since the start.
I need to experience his non-Big Two work.
Yeah, I think it's like I think his Green Arrow work with Sorrentino in the New 52 is probably the single best New 52 book that exists. His Animal Man's great as well.
Yeah, I slightly prefer his Animal Man, I think.
I mean, I think it's a little bit preference, honestly. I think his Green Arrow is a little bit more focused.
It also doesn't rely on anything else, while his Animal Man was working in tandem with Snyder's Swamp Thing. And
yes, like his Green Arrow is in one hardcover. His and Sorrentino's Green Arrow is in one hardcover that I definitely recommend.
Connor, have you read any of Seth's books?
Seth?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
He's another Canadian cartoonist. I've got two of his books here. And he's quite in that same sort of style as Jeff Lemire, in that like all of his books are about like these small kind of towns and the people who inhabit these towns.
I like that cover.
Yeah, I do as well.
This is phenomenal. As long as you read it through the lens of Seth realizes that he's an asshole who treats women terribly. If you don't read it through that lens, then you will fall into the trap of being exactly like Seth. But
it's a horribly misogynistic book otherwise.
That is a major theme in Phonogram as well.
Yeah, his artwork is phenomenal, and he's just finished. I still need to finish reading it. Clyde Fans, which is his masterpiece book that he's been, I think, writing and drawing it for like 25 years, and it's just been finished, and like as of a year and a half ago or something, and collected in like this lovely slipcase about these two brothers that run this fan shop basically and sell fans to businesses. But yeah,
that's nice.
I like that art.
Yeah.
If you like, it's not quite as sentimental as like Jimmy, but it's very much in the same ball.
Yeah, I think Lemire is probably one of my favorite creators.
It's if you like well, Essex County and things like that.
Yeah, like he's one of those handful of creators where I keep an eye on like what he's doing outside of the direct market just as much as inside. And like I have them pre-ordered as soon as they're in, the last one I think was Frogcatcher. Before that, Roughneck, which I think Roughneck's the one that's the hockey player, because he's Canadian, so obviously. But like I say, it is these small towns and just someone's story from that town is a lot of his books. But all of them manage to have a sentimental feeling and emotional gut punch, and you'd think that he'd run out of ways to pull this off because it's in every single book that he does. Yet there it is. And I say, people probably know him as a writer from the Big Two. There's why people know him, and
he picked up after he did DC's Arrow guy. He went and picked up Hawkeye after
Yeah, he did.
After
I think he did.
Fraction, an
I think
Asia
he
left.
reteamed with Sorrentino and did Old Man Logan
Yeah.
after that as well. So people definitely know his name, but I think it's his strength as a cartoonist that makes him a unique voice. Don't get me wrong, his writing is obviously great. Like I said, I love a lot of those big two books. I love the stories that he tells, but it is his unique style as a cartoonist that sets him apart and makes him special. And I think more people need to appreciate that and kind of check out some of the stuff he's drawn. Like I say, start with Sweet Tooth or Trillium if you want something that's published by the big two in the direct market. Royal City, Image, I think it's all collecting one nice hardcover now. It's another great one. And that's probably more in line with a lot of his, non-direct market stuff. Royal City tonally feels like it could have been published as one of these graphic novels, frankly, because I think it's about 14 issues long. So it kind of fits in that range. But yeah, other than that, I think Underwater World recently got a new hardcover printing, which kind of tempted to get just because I like having nice hardcovers on the shelf. I don't need it. I've got this copy here, obviously, but yeah, it'd be nice.
It makes me sad there's not more love and appreciation for The Nobody specifically, because that was my first Jeff Lemire book, and I think it's been out of print for about 10 years now. It was published by Vertigo, and it's basically his take on The Invisible Man, which is why I think maybe some people have neglected it, because it's not necessarily like an original Jeff Lemire story. It's kind of a reinterpretation of, a classic story, but it's the best kind of adaptation of The Invisible Man I've seen in any medium. Like, it's absolutely phenomenal.
It's a bold claim, because there's been a lot of adaptations.
I did love last year's film.
He's really able to get into it.
Yeah, last year's film was pretty good as well.
Yeah,
but I need to see that actually.
Well, I think that gives you all a idea of the kind of books we're into. We're not sure what our next episode will be about yet, but we've give you an episode of just talking about comics and a bit more of a narrow focus this time. This will be going up at some point. It could be the far future. We don't know. But if you watch it and you enjoy it, keep watching, and we might review Josie and the Pussycats for you. Even if those who don't want to. I might make it happen.
We make no promises.